Your daughter is on an IEP, has a behavior plan. There was a behavior at school that led to the police and the ambulance being called due to her making threats of self-harm. When you asked about the behavior incident report, was told that it would be mailed to you and said it was emailed by the case manager and written on plain notebook paper. Isn't an incident report a legal document and part of the child's record? The answer is yes. It would be personally identifiable to your child. Yes, it should be part of the education record. No, it doesn't necessarily need to be on some official document. I mean, I can tell you that there's many handwritten notes, other things that the education system does that become part of the child's education record or should be part of the child's education record that is personally identifiable. That's really the standard when it comes to the formality. Should it have been more formal? Yes. Does it have to be? No, not necessarily. Okay. So it just sort of depends on the amount of detail. The bigger concern is why the ambulance and police were called. You didn't provide enough detail to really understand the gravity of the situation with regards to self-harm and to where it reaches that level. And so, but I'm going to go ahead and sort of answer this anyway. If these are behaviors, for example, that your child has had, that is part of the reason why you have a behavior intervention plan, then that tells me that the behavior intervention plan isn't working and it is not appropriate if the response of the school is to take an extreme position in addressing these known behaviors through the use of an ambulance and a third party being the police, okay, which aren't equipped to deal with things like that. And you sit there and say, well, the level of self-harm is sort of the analysis. I don't have enough of that information, but I can tell you that if it's a threat of self-harm, depending on what it is, and especially if the school district has notice, then at that point, I would want to go back because the child at some point is going to return to school, okay? Whether it's the next day or whether they are kept for 48 hours or 72 hours in a treatment facility or a little bit more long-term. Eventually, the child returns to the school environment, right? And this is where I typically see a problem. And it doesn't really matter what the child is being served for. I have kids that have dyslexia that go to private dyslexia schools. But then when they're out of these private programs, there is a complete breakdown of implementation and a continuation of that success because the school wasn't involved. The school wasn't doing it appropriately on the outset. That's why the parent or the child needed to go to this outside facility to get additional support. And that's where the problem lies, is that what is the catalyst? What were the problems that led up to that? Because this is where you need to sort of address this in order to effectively get this handled so that you don't have these problems pop up in the future. So I would go back, look at the behavior intervention plan, and if it is a behavior that she has had before, that the school district has handled in a different manner, then why didn't they handle it this way this time? Why was it handled in the extreme? Also, what professions are involved to support that behavior intervention plan, whether it be a behavior analyst, whether it be a psychologist, a social worker, somebody that is effectively trained to deal with this level of behavior and this level of need. Because if that doesn't exist, then your behavior plan is trash anyway. You got to sit there and envelop these plans if they're appropriate, truly appropriate, envelop it with the right professionals to conduct the right competency-based training so everybody that deals in and interacts with your child at school effectively understand the antecedents. What are the behaviors? What are the potential triggers to then cause these kind of responses, so that the staff, whoever interacts with your child, has sufficient information to know how to follow the plan. instead of reaching for these extremes of an ambulance and a police. So much of this stuff can be handled in-house. And you sit there and, you know, I hear educators all the time, we're not psychologists and we're not this. Nobody ever said you were, but at the same time, you're educators. And I hate to break it to you guys, academics is only one aspect of the educational performance continuum. And the educational performance continuum includes social emotional development. All right. So I believe that we should let our teachers teach again, and we don't sit there and continue to obsess over Common Core and STEM, which according to the most recent studies, the scores have gone down in math and reading, guys, in most demographic areas since whatever 2008 or whenever the last tracking, and we've really gone down when it comes to social emotional development. Why is that? Well, that's because we're teaching toward a test. We've taken away largely an educator's ability to actually teach and instruct and guide and help and serve and love. You know, it's more robotic now. In many capacities, to where, you know, the schools sit there and say, we just don't have time for this stuff. You don't have time for arts. You don't have time for true socialization. And those things, once they're sort of antiseptically cleansed from the school hallways and doors and these opportunities, you're going to see an increase in social emotional development because a child needs to be enveloped in that. And I'm not saying anything that educators or parents shouldn't already know. I'm just telling you we have a real gap in that level of service to where we need competent outside professionals to come in and help support appropriate behavior plans and behavior programs. And if you do it and you build that appropriate foundation way back here, then we don't have to deal with things like police and ambulances and staff going, I just don't know how to deal with this child. Well, that's because you didn't do the groundwork. And yes, it requires a commitment of resources. It requires tangible training, guys, not just some, you know, somebody writing stuff down and then having you look at it and go, oh, okay. Well, it's ridiculous. I just had a meeting a second ago to where I pointed that out to the school psychometrist and a speech language pathologist that were sort of the heads of the meeting, where they wanted for this behavior plan for the behavior analyst to just fade out, and then they would train and they would help with implementation for staff. And I told this psychometrist, I said, well, tell you what, I'll just have the BCBA come in and do a psychological evaluation, IQ, achievement tests, and then I'll also have her do an ALS, which is a language evaluation. You know, and they both looked at me and I said, that's right, the behavior analysts can't do what you guys do. So don't act like you can do what they do. We have different hats on an IEP team for a reason. These people have different levels of expertise. That's why we have OTs and speech language pathologists and physical therapists and even adaptive physical education teachers. It requires a group of professionals, and when it comes to behavior, complex behaviors, the schools, a lot of it is due to the law just not being very good when it comes to how we deal with behaviors in schools, and also social emotional learning, to the point where it's sort of the Wild West. Schools are sort of having they're lazy in this area. They don't like to commit the resources in this area, but yet this is one of the biggest areas supposedly driving educators out of the business and causing the most frustration. And, you know, it finds its way in the news when these children are out of control. All things that can be addressed if we just front load the training and front load who is involved and have competent people and professionals involved on the front end to support our educators and support our aides. And so in your particular situation, my main concern is it wasn't front loaded. It was not front loaded to where you have a good behavior plan, a good foundation to be able to effectively support your child and their program. to avoid that from happening in the future.